I never expected Christmas Eve to feel like a betrayal. But there I was, standing in the hallway of my parents' house, grocery bags digging into my palms, frozen, as I overheard the words that had been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. She owes us. We fed her for 18 years. Thank God we have Marcus. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to breathe. Marcus, my younger brother, the one who had never held a job in 3 years, was being praised for every dollar I had sent my parents, month after month, without fail. $2,000 every single month for 15 years. $360,000. My entire adult life had been quietly funneled to sustain a family that had erased my sacrifices. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't confront my mother. I simply pulled out my phone and made one call. Just one. By New Year's Eve, everyone who had believed the story I was the ungrateful daughter would finally see the truth. But first, I had to sit with the memory of how it all began. I was 23, fresh out of college, staring at my first real paycheck, student loans looming, 3 part-time jobs during school, barely keeping my apartment lights on. No help from my parents, not a single dime. And yet, when I started earning, I didn't think twice. I sent money home. I told myself it was what good daughters did. I told myself it was love. Every Christmas, every birthday, every minor celebration, I was invisible. Marcus got a free ride through life while I clawed my way through tuition, rent, and student debt. My parents cheered for him. They dismissed me, and no one, no relative, no friend, no passerby knew the truth. I want to pause for a moment here and invite you to subscribe and stand for dignity. This story is about boundaries, about reclaiming respect, and about recognizing when giving stops being love and starts being exploitation. If you're watching this, stay with me. The moment when the truth finally lands is coming, and it's worth it. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, calculator in hand, tracing every transfer, every deposit, $500, $1,000, $2,000, year after year, month after month, 15 years of silent support. And for the first time, I asked myself, what would it take for them to see me, to acknowledge me? I didn't know yet that the answer would arrive on Christmas Eve, but I did know this. I was done being invisible. Long before I opened my first bank account, before I had my first paycheck, I understood one thing very clearly. I was invisible in my own family. I was 10 years old when I needed $12 for a school project books about the solar system. Nothing fancy. My father barely looked up from his newspaper. Go to the library, he said. That same week, Marcus got a brand new Nintendo. $200. No questions asked. I swallowed the disappointment, tucked it away, and convinced myself it was normal. At 16, I earned a partial academic scholarship. I practiced my speech in front of the mirror, pressed my best dress, and imagined the proud smiles of my parents in the audience. They didn't show up. Marcus had a baseball game, Mom explained over the phone. You understand, sweetie, don't you? I did. Perfectly. I understood that my victories were invisible, that my presence wasn't celebrated, that my achievements were taken for granted. By 18, I overheard my father at Thanksgiving talking to my uncle. Why invest in a girl's education? He laughed. She'll just get married and pop out babies, someone else's problem. The table erupted in laughter. I sat in the corner, pretending to sip my drink, holding back the anger and hurt. Invisible. Worthless. Forgotten. When I landed my first real job as a junior analyst in Chicago, the cycle continued. I sent $500 home that month. My mother called, disappointed. Marcus needed help with his credit card. $500 wasn't enough. So I doubled it, then doubled it again the next year. Every promotion, every bonus, every raise meant more money flowing to a family who didn't even acknowledge me. 15 years later, I did the math. 12 months, $2,000 each. 180 months, $360,000. The number burned in my mind, but so did the realization. I had been erased while sustaining them. Even now, thinking back, I felt the weight of every stolen acknowledgement, every ignored effort, every subtle dismissal from childhood to adulthood. I wasn't angry yet, just tired, exhausted from being invisible. And then, I thought about you, anyone watching this right now. Anyone who's ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or silenced. If you understand quiet strength, You belong here. Subscribe. This isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's had to give without recognition, for anyone learning that boundaries aren't betrayal, they're survival. That night, sitting with my laptop and my calculator, I realized I had everything I needed to finally make them see. Proof, numbers, official records. No argument could erase the truth. No lie could withstand it. I didn't know what the reaction would be, but I knew one thing. I would never be invisible again. The night after Thanksgiving, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the conversation I'd overheard. My mother laughing, telling Aunt Carol, "She owes us. We fed her for 18 years." Every word cut deeper than any argument could. 15 years of sacrifices erased with a few careless sentences. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and my laptop. Every transfer I'd made, every dollar sent to cover tuition, medical bills, and living expenses, they were all there in my bank history, quietly proving what I had done for them. But words, even numbers in my head, weren't enough. I needed official documentation, something that no lie could touch. The first call was to Margaret Chen, my CPA, the person who'd handled my taxes for years. Her voice, warm yet puzzled, asked, "Serena, it's Christmas Eve. Is everything okay?" I didn't waste a moment on pleasantries. "I need certified records of every transfer I've made to my parents for the past 15 years, I said. She paused, the weight of the request hanging between us. 15 years, she agreed. She could notarize the statements. Next, I called Thomas Reed, my estate lawyer. 2 years ago, Daniel and I had created wills together, listing my parents as secondary beneficiaries. Now I needed to change that. "I want to remove them entirely," I told him, steady and deliberate. "Replace it with a children's education charity." The irony wasn't lost on me. Money that could have funded my own education, used to support me, was now redirected to kids who needed it the way I had once needed help. As I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The truth was no longer something I carried silently. It would be seen. It would be undeniable. I glanced at the calendar. December 30th, 2 days before the party. By New Year's Eve, I would make them face it. And if you're watching this now, someone who has ever felt your contributions erased, your sacrifices ignored, or your voice silenced, join where dignity stands. Subscribe. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's been invisible. Anyone learning that being heard starts with choosing boundaries over guilt. I organized the stacks of bank statements, printed them page by page. Each sheet a testament to years of quiet giving, months of overlooked labor, years of proving love without recognition. Daniel watched me work, silent but steady. He knew what this meant finally. The moment of truth was coming. I didn't know what would happen that night, but I knew one thing for sure. 15 years of invisible sacrifice were about to become impossible to ignore. The night was crisp, and the air smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. Daniel dropped me off outside my parents' house. Music and laughter spilled through the windows, the glow of string lights painting familiar walls in warmth that suddenly felt false. I gripped my leather briefcase tightly. Inside it were 47 pages of proof, 15 years of bank transfers, each dollar meticulously documented. I paused at the door, taking a breath. I didn't know what I would say, or if I would even speak. Tonight wasn't about confrontation, it was about truth. The same house where I had spent holidays feeling invisible now held the secret that would finally make them see. I slipped inside quietly, trying to avoid the crowd. 30 relatives, aunts and uncles, cousins and their kids, crowded into every corner. Marcus was there, smiling, basking in the attention, holding a glass of champagne. My parents were at the center, performing the roles they had perfected over years, proud, accomplished, deserving of admiration. And then I heard the words that froze me in place. My mother, laughing, telling someone, "She's never sent us a dime. Thank God we have Marcus." My stomach turned, and for a moment, I felt the old suffocating weight of 15 years. Every transfer, every sacrifice, erased. Every holiday, a reminder that I had been invisible. I didn't respond immediately. I stayed in the corner, observing, letting the room play out exactly as they intended it. Every word, every gesture, reinforced what they thought they knew. I clutched the briefcase at my feet, the leather cool under my trembling hands. And here's something I want to say to you, anyone watching who has ever felt unrecognized, unseen, or undervalued. This isn't about revenge. It's about standing for yourself, your worth, and the truth. The moment to reclaim your dignity is always worth it. Minutes passed. Conversations flowed around me, but I remained still, quiet. I didn't need to speak yet. I didn't need to react yet. I only needed to wait. Wait for the right moment. Wait for the moment when truth would no longer be ignored. Because I had 15 years of invisible sacrifices, and tonight, it was time for them to be impossible to overlook. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second amplifying the quiet tension that had settled over the room. I remained in my corner, watching, letting the chaos of a family party unfold around me without moving a muscle. 30 people, 30 oblivious witnesses, laughing and sharing stories, while my entire adult life, the sacrifices, the money, the support had been quietly erased by the very people I had devoted myself to. Marcus sat cross-legged on the couch, sipping his champagne, smiling whenever someone praised him for being so dependable and such a good son. He hadn't contributed a single penny consistently, yet he carried himself as if he had built the foundation of our parents' household. I could see the little flickers of pride in his eyes, but also a faint trace of guilt. He knew I had been the one sustaining them all along. My parents were at the center of attention, their faces lit by the warm glow of the string lights, performing the roles they had perfected over decades. Mom laughed at anecdotes from their friends. Dad nodded approvingly at Marcus's comments about his investment ideas. I had learned to recognize these patterns years ago, the way their smiles never reached their eyes when I was in the room, the way praise was always misdirected. I adjusted my grip on the leather briefcase at my feet. 47 pages of proof rested inside, each one a record of what I had quietly given: $500, $1,000, $2,000 every month for 15 years. Numbers that spoke louder than words, evidence that could not be twisted, denied, or ignored. My heart thudded in my chest, a rhythmic reminder that the moment was approaching. I thought of Daniel's calm face earlier in the car, the way he had reminded me that this wasn't about punishment, revenge, or anger. This was about clarity, about boundaries, about finally allowing the truth to be seen by everyone in the room. 15 years of erased contributions were about to be impossible to overlook. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the silence around me. Cousins drifted past, aunts and uncles chatted, but my focus narrowed. I had rehearsed this in my mind countless times, imagining the subtle ways I would present the documents, the way I would let them speak for themselves. No yelling, no theatrics, just evidence, just truth. As the minutes ticked closer to the peak of the evening, I felt a strange clarity wash over me. I wasn't nervous in the way I had expected. I was calm, resolute. The burden I had carried for 15 years, the need for acknowledgement, the quiet desperation to be seen, was finally about to be lifted. Tonight, everyone in this room would see what had been invisible for too long, and I would finally step out of the shadow I had lived in my entire life. I waited until the room's chatter softened for a moment, until the attention briefly shifted to someone recounting a holiday story. That was my cue. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted the leather briefcase from my feet and set it on the coffee table. The clasp clicked, a small, almost imperceptible sound, but in the quiet of the room, it felt like a starting gun. "Thank you for letting me speak for a moment," I said, my voice calm, steady, unshaken. 30 pairs of eyes shifted toward me, curiosity flickering into confusion. Marcus froze mid-sip, his lazy smile faltering. My mother's eyes narrowed, a subtle twitch in her jaw. Dad straightened, his hands tightening around his champagne glass. I opened the briefcase carefully, revealing the neat stack of papers inside. "These are the records of every transfer I've made to Mom and Dad over the past 15 years, I continued. "Every month, without fail. Starting March 2011, ending last month." A ripple passed through the crowd. Cousins leaned forward. Aunt Ruth tilted her head, studying the stack of papers. Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch, trying to glance anywhere but at me. I pulled out the first page and held it up. $2,000. March 2011. I let the number hang in the air. Every month, like this, for 15 years. Murmurs started quietly, growing into whispers. Aunt Ruth reached for the stack, flipping a few pages, eyes widening. $2,000. $2,000. Each month? Her voice was a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. Uncle Bob picked up a page and tapped his calculator app. Wait, that's $24,000 a year, times $360,000? Marcus's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for Dad's arm. His champagne glass shook in his hand, the warm glow of the room suddenly cold and harsh. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't add commentary. I let the documents speak. Each page told a story of years I had silently supported a family that had misrepresented me. 15 years erased, 15 years of credit given to someone else. Aunt Ruth's eyes met mine. She whispered to no one in particular, I had no idea. Other relatives started passing the pages along, faces changing as the truth sank in. Confusion, shock, a touch of disbelief. And somewhere behind it all, a flicker of justice, quiet, undeniable, long overdue. Marcus slumped back, silent. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Dad's shoulders sagged, the confident posture of authority gone in an instant. 15 years of lies, 15 years of erasure, collapsing in front of everyone. The room had changed. Not violently, not dramatically, just quietly. The truth had landed, and no one could ignore it. Not now. The room had fallen into an uneasy hush, the kind of silence that stretched so long it almost had weight. Every eye was on the papers now, on the stack of numbers that refused to lie. My mother's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her dress. Dad's knuckles were white around his glass, and Marcus was staring at the floor, trying to shrink into himself. I didn't rush. I let the moment settle. 15 years of misrepresentation, 15 years of stolen acknowledgement, it all existed now in plain sight, undeniable and certified. Every transfer, notarized, every figure accounted for. This was my quiet justice, and it was far more powerful than shouting. Aunt Ruth cleared her throat, holding the top sheet. Harold, Diane, are these really accurate? Her voice was soft but firm, carrying through the room. My parents exchanged a glance. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. Dad shifted uneasily. Marcus finally lifted his head. His eyes met mine, a flicker of panic crossing his features. I didn't, he started, then stopped. Words failed him. 15 years of credit had been falsely assigned to him. He had allowed it, silently, while I had been the one making the sacrifices. I stepped a little closer, calm but deliberate. Marcus, I said, my voice quiet but clear. This is 15 years of my contributions. Every dollar you've been credited for was sent from me. His face paled, and he looked down again. I didn't know, he muttered, almost a whisper. You didn't know? Or you didn't care? I asked, carefully measuring each word. The room shifted. Relatives leaned in. Whispers rippled as they realized the truth. Aunt Carol's jaw dropped, Uncle Bob's arms crossed, and even some of the younger cousins were wide-eyed with disbelief. My parents tried to speak, but the words felt hollow. It's complicated, Dad finally said, but no one was buying it. My mother's face went pale, her habitual defensiveness gone, replaced by something closer to shock. Aunt Ruth shook her head slowly. Marcus, you've been taking credit for something you didn't do? All these years? He opened his mouth again, and for the first time I saw real hesitation. He had no explanation, no proof, no defense. His silence was deafening. The carefully constructed illusion of him as the helpful son had crumbled in front of everyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't add commentary. I let the silence and the papers speak. The truth had landed. 15 years of erasure were now visible to 30 witnesses. My sacrifices, my voice, my boundaries, they were finally recognized. For the first time in 15 years, I felt the faintest trace of relief. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense that the truth, finally, had been seen. I took a slow breath and lifted the first page higher so everyone could see. This is March 2011, I said, calm and deliberate. $500, the start of 15 years of consistent support. Aunt Ruth leaned in, curiosity and disbelief flickering in her eyes. I continued, flipping the page. April 2011, $1,000. May 2011, $1,000. Every single month, without fail, the same pattern. When I got a raise, the amount increased. When there were financial emergencies, I made sure it was covered. $2,000 a month for 15 years. Total, $360,000. The room was still. 30 pairs of eyes scanning the numbers, murmuring quietly as the scale of the truth sank in. Marcus's posture collapsed. He had been credited for every penny, yet he had contributed nothing. Dad's hand trembled as he held his glass. Mom's face had gone pale, her habitual composure gone. Uncle Bob pulled out his phone and started calculating, confirming each figure. $24,000 a year times 15, $360,000? His voice was incredulous. The other relatives whispered among themselves, double-checking with quick mental math. I could feel the weight of their attention, the shift in energy, the long overdue acknowledgement settling over the room. I let the silence linger, giving them time to process. All of this was done quietly, I said softly. No announcements, no complaints, just consistent support, because that's what I believed a daughter should do for her family. But apparently, it was invisible. Aunt Carol's face tightened. You mean, all this time? Marcus wasn't? She couldn't finish the thought. Everyone turned toward him, expectant. Marcus looked down at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. He had allowed the lie to continue, and now the reality of it could not be avoided. Mom attempted to speak, her voice shaky. But, Marcus, he's always been so helpful. I shook my head slowly. He's been helpful in stories, in appearances. The actual support, the consistency, that's been me, every single month for 15 years. The room went quiet again, a different silence this time. Not the hum of a family party, but the weight of truth. Whispers circled. Astonished faces turned toward my parents, their previous authority faltering under the undeniable evidence. Even the younger cousins, who had seen Marcus as the perfect son, now looked confused, questioning everything they had believed. I closed the briefcase slightly, the papers now circulating through the hands of relatives, each leaf a testament to years of unnoticed work and invisible sacrifices. It was subtle, calm, but the shift was undeniable. For the first time, the reality of what I had done and what had been denied to me was seen by everyone who mattered in that room. I stood a little taller, letting the weight of the briefcase and the papers behind me settle as evidence before everyone. Mom's hands trembled slightly, and Dad's jaw tightened. The room was quiet, but charged with tension like the air before a storm breaks. Mom, Dad, I began, calm but unwavering. For 15 years, I've supported this family financially, every month, without fail. Every expense you've said Marcus covered, I covered. Every vacation, every bill, every emergency me. Not him. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He glanced around, his confidence slipping with every word. I didn't know, he stammered. You didn't know? I echoed softly. Or you didn't care to correct the narrative? The room went silent again. Relatives leaned in, whispering, some covering mouths in shock. Aunt Ruth's eyes glistened, the weight of recognition dawning. Dad opened his mouth, tried to interject. This is private family business, he said, voice faltering. I shook my head, steady. Private? You told everyone else I was ungrateful. You told Marcus was the one keeping you afloat. That's not private. That's a lie. And it's 15 years of erasing my efforts. Mom's eyes welled with tears, but they weren't tears of apology. They were tears of exposure, the realization that their story had been dismantled in front of 30 witnesses. She tried to speak again. Serena, we never meant. No, I cut in gently, yet firmly. You didn't mean to acknowledge me. You only meant to maintain appearances. You never thanked me. You never saw me. And Marcus, he's been silent while this lie persisted. Marcus looked down at his hands, swallowing hard. I didn't think it mattered. Not thinking it mattered, I said quietly. Allowed everyone to believe the wrong story, for 15 years. Every holiday, every milestone, every family conversation, you let it be me erased. The room was quiet, heavy with the weight of truth. My parents' authority, the image they had carefully maintained, had crumbled. Relatives' whispers rippled, some shaking their heads, others staring at Marcus, finally seeing him as he was not the hero they'd been told he was. I exhaled slowly, the first trace of relief washing over me. Not triumph, not revenge, just clarity. 15 years of invisible labor were now undeniable. Marcus had to face it, my parents had to face it, and for the first time, I was seen. I lowered the briefcase slightly, letting the papers circulate. The room was no longer the same. Something fundamental had shifted. 15 years of lies could not survive the weight of truth, and tonight I had made them visible. The room was heavy with quiet. For a long moment, no one spoke. The papers, each one meticulously detailing 15 years of my support, had done their work. Faces shifted, eyes darted between the numbers and each other. Marcus sat frozen, hands clenched, every ounce of his carefree confidence gone. Dad's shoulders slumped, the authority he had held over decades dissolving into the weight of undeniable evidence. Mom sat on the couch, hands folded tightly, lips pressed together, trying to gather words that no longer existed. The authority of the story they had told Serena never helps. Marcus is the good son, had crumbled in front of 30 witnesses. I stayed calm, letting the moment breathe. I didn't need to raise my voice or demand apologies. That was never the point. My voice alone, steady and deliberate, paired with the documents, carried more weight than anything I could have shouted. Aunt Ruth, still holding the top sheet, looked at Marcus. "This is all verified, Marcus. Are you going to tell us the truth?" He swallowed hard, eyes darting to the floor. I didn't contribute consistently. I let it be," he admitted, voice barely audible. The room exhaled in a mixture of shock and relief, finally seeing him for what he had allowed himself to be, the passive beneficiary of someone else's hard work. Mom's voice quavered as she finally spoke. "Serena, this is unexpected." "Not unexpected," I said softly, meeting her eyes. "Just overdue. 15 years of invisible contributions, erased by words and assumptions. That ends now." The tension slowly shifted into an awareness, a recognition of reality. Some relatives whispered to each other, nodding subtly as comprehension dawned. Aunt Carol's face softened with understanding. Uncle Bob shook his head slowly, as if the truth had weight too long ignored. I adjusted the briefcase, making sure every page remained visible, circulating among those who wanted a closer look. Every number, every record, told a story of steady, quiet dedication. 15 years of my life documented, undeniable, and finally, visible. I let Marcus look at me, silently. He didn't argue, didn't deflect. He had to confront the truth, just as my parents had to confront the narrative they had perpetuated. The room had shifted not violently, not dramatically, but fundamentally. 15 years of lies could no longer hold. And I felt it then, a quiet, deep relief. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just clarity. I had made them see. I had made the truth unavoidable. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like the daughter I had always been, finally recognized. I picked up the briefcase again, slowly, deliberately, letting every eye in the room follow the movement. The papers had already done their work. Marcus was silent, my parents frozen, relatives whispering among themselves, but there was one final piece that needed to be addressed. I placed the briefcase on the coffee table, unzipped it, and let it rest where everyone could see. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice calm and even. "Starting next month, I will no longer be sending money to Mom and Dad." A collective intake of breath spread through the room. Marcus shifted uneasily. Dad's hand trembled on his glass. Mom's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The silence was thick, but I didn't rush to fill it. "This isn't about anger," I continued. "It's about boundaries. 15 years of supporting a family that misrepresented my contributions is enough. I have the right to control my own resources, my own life, and that begins now." I opened a folder in the briefcase, revealing letters from Thomas Reed, my estate lawyer. "I've updated my life insurance beneficiaries and my will. Mom, Dad, you are no longer listed. Any funds that would have gone to you will now support children's education funds for kids from low-income families." The irony wasn't lost on me. Money I had sent to support a family that denied my efforts, erased me, and credited Marcus for my work was now being redirected to children who needed it the way I once had. Mom's voice finally came, trembling. "Serena, how can you be so?" I shook my head gently. "Not punishment, just boundaries. Recognition of my worth. You told everyone I was ungrateful, gave Marcus credit for my support, denied me acknowledgement. I'm done. I am claiming my own life, my own contributions, and my own future." The room was silent again. Relatives looked on, some nodding subtly, understanding finally dawning. Marcus avoided my eyes, realizing for the first time the magnitude of his inaction. Dad's jaw tightened, Mom's posture sagged. The narrative they had built over decades had been dismantled, piece by piece, not with anger, but with truth and calm resolve. I closed the briefcase slowly, letting the quiet settle. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply reclaiming control, reclaiming dignity, and finally establishing boundaries that 15 years of sacrifice had demanded. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: clarity, freedom, the right to prioritize myself without guilt, without manipulation, without erasure. 15 years of being invisible, finally visible, and finally, no longer obligated to fund a lie. The room remained silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that presses down like weight. 30 pairs of eyes were on me, but the focus had shifted. This was no longer about the evidence itself. It was about the consequences, the truth finally settling in. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the floor, the realization hitting him like cold water. Every story he had told, every acknowledgement he had received, was a lie. Mom finally broke the silence, her voice low, trembling. "Serena, I... we... we didn't mean for this to go so far." I shook my head gently. "You didn't mean to acknowledge me. You didn't mean to recognize my efforts. That's the truth. Intentions don't erase actions or inactions." Dad's face flushed red, a mixture of embarrassment and desperation. "It's not that simple," he said, voice cracking. "Marcus helps in other ways. You know that. I know that he's done nothing comparable to 15 years of consistent support," I replied evenly. "Every month without fail, every expense you credited to him came from me. That's the reality. And it doesn't require interpretation or excuse." Marcus finally lifted his eyes, the weight of shame settling across his face. I didn't think anyone would notice," he murmured. I didn't correct it." "You didn't correct it," I said softly, letting the words linger. "And for 15 years, everyone believed the wrong story. Every holiday, every family gathering, every conversation you let me be erased." The relatives began to speak quietly among themselves, some nodding subtly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Aunt Ruth's eyes were soft but determined. "Harold, Diane, this has been allowed for too long. Serena's right. 15 years of being erased is more than enough." Mom's hands twisted in her lap. Dad's eyes darted to Marcus, then back to me. I saw the first glimmers of comprehension, the quiet acknowledgement that the carefully constructed narrative of the past 15 years was now gone. The house, once filled with warmth and the illusion of order, now held the cold light of truth. Marcus's shoulders sagged. I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Say nothing," I replied. "Actions spoke louder than words, and they've spoken for 15 years." Aunt Carol shook her head slowly. "We all believed the wrong story. I didn't know. We trusted the narrative, and it was false. You carried everything quietly, Serena." The room's energy shifted from tension to reflection. The relatives were processing, questioning, recalibrating the way they saw our family. The hierarchy my parents had built on appearances, Marcus's unearned credit, the erasure of me, the invisible daughter, was being dismantled quietly, irrevocably. Mom's voice broke finally, softer this time. "Serena, we never truly saw you." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The acknowledgement finally was in the room. The shift had occurred. 15 years of invisible sacrifice, erased and miscredited, had been revealed. The fallout had begun, and the consequences were being absorbed silently, slowly, deeply. For the first time in years, I felt a strange lightness. The truth had landed. Marcus had to face it. My parents had to face it. The family had to face it. And for the first time, I was free to step forward without invisibility, without erasure, without carrying the weight of a lie they had maintained for decades. The day after New Year's Eve, I sat alone in my apartment, the stack of documents still resting on the coffee table beside me. 15 years of invisible labor had been revealed, and the roomful of relatives had seen the truth. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel the need to justify myself. The relief was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was there, deep, steady, grounding. By the next morning, I had sent the last of the monthly transfers to my parents. Not because I wanted to help, not because I owed them anything, but because it was the last automatic obligation of a life I had carried silently. 15 years of payments, every dollar accounted for, had been my way of seeking approval that never came. Now, I was reclaiming it for myself. Marcus called mid-morning. His voice was shaky, uncertain. Serena, I don't know what to do. You don't do anything, I interrupted gently but firmly. You've been silent while the credit for my work went to you. You know it, I know it, and now everyone else knows it too. That's the truth. Actions speak, Marcus. And 15 years of silence speak louder than any apology you could offer now. I could hear him swallow hard on the other end. He didn't argue, he didn't deflect. The recognition of his inaction, and the consequences of it, had landed. It wasn't punishment. It was clarity. My parents, meanwhile, had begun to process what had happened in a way only they could. Mom sent a tentative email, carefully phrased, trying to reclaim some connection without acknowledging the erasure. Dad called once, voice tight with frustration and pride, but quickly hung up when I refused to engage beyond the facts. Their attempts to reclaim influence were subtle, measured, almost desperate, but I had already drawn the line. My boundaries were clear, and this time, I wasn't crossing them for anyone. The aftermath rippled through the rest of the family quietly. Aunt Ruth called every Sunday, checking in, acknowledging my role, apologizing for not seeing it sooner. Uncle Bob sent long messages reflecting on the patterns they had all unconsciously reinforced. Cousins reached out, curious, confused, and eventually respectful, now able to recognize me for who I had been all along. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years. There was no triumph, no victory in the way I imagined as a child, just clarity. 15 years of work, sacrifice, and love had finally been visible. I didn't owe anyone anything. I didn't need validation. I had reclaimed my voice, my resources, and my life. It was the quietest kind of freedom. No shouting, no drama, just the calm weight of finally being seen. Marcus, my parents, even the extended family now, they were left to reckon with the reality of their choices. And I could finally move forward, without carrying the invisible burden that had defined my adult life for too long. After the whirlwind of New Year's Eve and the quiet reckoning that followed, I woke up one morning with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The house was empty, the documents stacked neatly in the briefcase, and for the first time, I realized something fundamental. My life no longer belonged to anyone else. 15 years of invisible labor, of erased contributions, had ended. Now it was time to rebuild on my terms. Daniel and I spent the morning planning, quietly but deliberately, the life we wanted to create together. We reviewed our finances, the savings that had quietly accumulated while I had supported my family. Every dollar I hadn't sent to my parents this year, every investment we had made for ourselves, became a foundation for our future. For the first time, I felt the power of control not over others but over my own life. I booked a trip to California to meet Aunt Patricia, the sister of my father I had never known existed. She had reached out after hearing about the New Year's Eve revelation, offering connection, understanding, and a family built on honesty rather than obligation. The plane ticket felt symbolic. 15 years of being invisible, now turning toward a family that truly saw me. Back home, the rhythm of life was different. I no longer checked in obsessively, no longer worried about whether my parents or Marcus would recognize my contributions. Their silence, their delayed acknowledgement, and even their attempts at control no longer carried weight. I felt lighter, freer, and more aligned with myself than I ever had before. Even Marcus reached out eventually, hesitant, awkward, and apologetic in small ways. He couldn't erase the past, and neither could I. But I could choose how much of him and of anyone would be part of my life going forward. And I chose boundaries, respect, self-preservation. The people around me, Daniel, Aunt Ruth, Patricia, close friends, became my mirrors, reflecting back the dignity, strength, and recognition I had been denied for decades. It was healing, slow but profound. I began to see that family wasn't just the people you were born into. It was the people who saw you, acknowledged you, and respected you for who you were. I started planting little rituals of affirmation in my new life. Sunday walks, quiet breakfasts with Daniel, long conversations with Patricia about family patterns and courage, budgeting not for someone else's approval, but for our shared dreams. Every choice reinforced that my life, my contributions, and my worth belonged to me first. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt fully present, fully recognized, and fully free. The past was not erased, it had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my dignity, and in doing so, I had begun to build the family I deserved, one rooted in honesty, respect, and love. The weeks after New Year's passed in a strange mix of calm and reflection. The revelation of 15 years of erased contributions had shaken the family, but it had also clarified everything for me. I began to see not just who had failed to recognize me, but also the patterns I no longer had to participate in. Marcus tried tentatively to reach out more consistently, but I listened carefully, measuring his words against 15 years of silence. His apologies were small, hesitant, and often unspoken in full. I realized quickly that acknowledgement alone wasn't enough. Actions had to align with words. He had a long way to go before trust could be rebuilt, and I would set the pace. Mom and Dad, meanwhile, had begun a slow, awkward process of reckoning. Mom sent occasional emails, carefully phrased, expressing regret in abstract terms. Dad called once, voice tight with pride and shame, before hanging up abruptly when I didn't engage beyond the facts. Their attempts to repair a connection were unsteady, often more about reclaiming influence than offering genuine recognition. I sat down one evening, reviewing my feelings carefully. It was time to define boundaries clearly, not with anger, not with punishment, but with clarity. I drafted a message that would be sent to both parents. I have set my life in a direction that prioritizes dignity, truth, and mutual respect, I wrote. I will not resume financial support. Any attempt to manipulate or guilt me will be met with silence. Our relationship can only exist if it is based on acknowledgement and honesty, not obligation or expectation. I reread it several times, ensuring each word reflected calm certainty, not retribution. This was my way of reclaiming the narrative. 15 years of being taken for granted had taught me that boundaries were not betrayal, they were self-preservation. I looked at the calendar. The first transfer I would have made to my parents this month would go instead into our savings, building a future for Daniel and me. Every dollar now served the life I wanted, the life I was choosing. Freedom was not a dramatic act, it was a series of deliberate decisions, each one reinforcing my self-respect. The family's reactions were slow, subtle, but telling. Marcus became quieter, more reflective. Mom and Dad began to recognize, in small ways, that the era of unquestioned control and credit misappropriation was over. I didn't need apologies to move forward. Recognition alone was sufficient. They had been confronted by truth, and the truth had set the stage for a different kind of relationship, one where I would not be invisible again. Sitting in my apartment that evening, I realized how much power comes from clarity. 15 years of sacrifices had created a foundation not for anyone else, but for the life I now fully owned. Boundaries, honesty, and self-respect were no longer concepts to aspire to. They were the principles guiding every choice I made. And for the first time, I felt fully in control of the life I had worked so hard to build. A week later, I boarded a flight to California, anticipation and nerves tangled in equal measure. 15 years of invisibility had taught me to guard my heart, yet Aunt Patricia's email had carried a warmth and honesty I hadn't felt from my own family in decades. She had known the patterns, had recognized the erasure, and had reached out with no expectation, only connection. The airport arrival was quiet, uneventful. Patricia was there, smiling, holding a simple sign with my name. She hugged me immediately, and for the first time in years, I felt fully seen, not just acknowledged, but recognized, without qualification or agenda. Her home was modest, filled with laughter and life. Her children ran ahead, curious but polite, sensing the calm energy Patricia exuded. Her husband offered a warm, genuine handshake. This was a family built on respect, honesty, and love, the kind that didn't demand proof of worth, didn't measure value in financial contribution or obedience. We sat for hours, drinking coffee and talking in the sunlit kitchen. Patricia told me stories of my father's patterns, of how similar dynamics had affected her life decades ago. She had left Ohio young, refusing to participate in the erasure she had witnessed. "I learned that family isn't just blood," she said softly. "It's the people who see you, who honor you, who protect you from being invisible." I shared my story cautiously, letting her absorb the details of 15 years of financial support, miscredit, and the revelation on New Year's Eve. She listened without judgment, nodding, occasionally letting out a soft laugh at the absurdity of the lies. When I finished, she reached across the table and held my hand. "You did what you had to do," she said. "You didn't betray anyone. You reclaimed your life. That's courage." We talked for 6 hours straight, untangling family patterns that had spanned generations, identifying the moments where self-worth had been ignored, and celebrating the small victories that had brought me to this moment. I realized, in a way I hadn't before, that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building a life where my worth was recognized and protected. That evening, as I watched her family move through the house with quiet ease and laughter, I understood the depth of what I had gained. Not vengeance, not satisfaction, but connection, choice, and recognition. A family I had chosen, a space where my contributions mattered and my presence was honored. I left California that night with a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. 15 years of being invisible, 15 years of erased sacrifices, had led me here to people who saw me. And in that recognition, in that quiet, steadfast acceptance, I found a peace that had nothing to do with my parents' approval and everything to do with my own. For the first time, I felt fully capable of defining what family meant, and fully deserving of being part of one where love and respect weren't conditional. Back in Chicago, the quiet of our apartment felt almost strange after the intense whirlwind of revelations and California's warmth with Aunt Patricia. The city buzzed outside, but inside, Daniel and I had carved out a space that felt truly ours, safe, intentional, and grounded. The first week back, I noticed something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: ease. A slow, steady sense that I was no longer carrying invisible burdens. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee, and the faint scent of winter air seeping through slightly cracked windows. I spread the documents, the 47 pages that had rewritten the family narrative, on the kitchen table one last time. They had done their work. Every transfer, every calculation, every detail of 15 years of support had been acknowledged, understood, and witnessed. I didn't need to keep them out for proof anymore. That chapter was complete. Daniel poured us both a cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a gentle reminder of warmth and presence. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said softly. I nodded. It wasn't just relief. It was a quiet victory, the kind that isn't about triumphing over someone else, but about reclaiming yourself. We began reorganizing our finances with a clarity I had never had before. The money that had previously flowed to my parents' money I had once thought was an obligation or proof of love now became the foundation of our shared future. We created a budget for travel, for investments, and for experiences that would nourish us rather than sustain someone else's illusions. Every decision reinforced the boundaries I had fought so long to establish. The subtle healing began with routine, small affirmations. Sunday mornings became our time for reflection and planning. Long walks after work allowed me to process the residual weight of 15 years of invisible labor. I started journaling again, something I had abandoned in college when survival consumed all energy. Writing allowed me to trace patterns, understand lingering pain, and notice growth. For the first time, the past was not something I carried in shame or anger, it became a foundation for self-awareness. Marcus reached out sporadically, cautiously testing the boundaries I had set. I listened politely but kept my distance. This wasn't about revenge or rejection, it was about clarity. I had learned that apologies without action or acknowledgement were meaningless. 15 years of silence had taught me that words alone could not reset a lifetime of erasure. Trust, if it was to be rebuilt, would need to be earned, not assumed. My parents attempted to reach out as well, emails, a call or two, but I responded only with calm, factual boundaries. No guilt, no justification. I made it clear that while reconciliation could exist in principle, it could only happen on terms of honesty and mutual respect. Anything else would be a repeat of the past, a cycle I would no longer participate in. Within this new framework, I noticed something extraordinary: freedom. Not dramatic or sudden, but quiet, persistent, and deeply rooted. I could make choices for myself without guilt. I could spend time, energy, and money on things that mattered to me, rather than trying to earn approval that never existed. I could prioritize health, growth, and love freely, knowing that my value did not need external validation. Even in quiet moments watching the city lights from our apartment, or sipping tea with Daniel, the weight of 15 years slowly lifted. The fear of being invisible, ignored, or miscredited had diminished. I felt present, grounded, and alive in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be for decades. I began to imagine the future differently. Vacations we would take, projects we would pursue, even potential children someday would be nurtured in a space of clarity and respect. The life I had once imagined as impossible, built on silent sacrifice, unnoticed effort, and erasure, was now not only possible but tangible. I had built it on principles that mattered: honesty, self-worth, and the courage to enforce boundaries. 15 years of giving, of supporting, and of being invisible had taught me a lesson I now carried forward. Strength isn't loud. Freedom isn't flashy. True healing comes from claiming your own life, establishing your own rules, and choosing the family, the relationships, and the boundaries that honor who you are. Sitting beside Daniel that evening, I let the city hum below us and finally felt at peace. Not because the past had changed, but because I had. Weeks passed, and the quiet after the storm of revelation gave way to a new rhythm. Marcus no longer attempted casual conversations about finances or household contributions. He avoided bringing up money altogether. It wasn't fear in the dramatic sense, it was recognition. For the first time, he understood the reality of his inaction and the weight of 15 years of silent labor I had carried while he received credit. Mom and Dad, on the other hand, seemed suspended in a kind of disbelief. Mom sent tentative messages, careful and polite, softening each word so it might be acceptable. Dad called once, his voice restrained, as if measuring every syllable before letting it escape. Both were attempting to regain some foothold in a relationship they had tried to control for decades, but this time, their foothold was gone. I had drawn my boundaries clearly, and I would not bend them for anyone. Marcus reached out a second time, leaving a hesitant voicemail. "Serena, I just wanted to check in. I know I messed up." I listened to it once, then deleted it. There was nothing to repair yet. The acknowledgement of guilt alone could not reset 15 years of erasure. Words without action meant little. Marcus would have to earn recognition, just as my parents would have to demonstrate understanding and respect before any dynamic could change. The extended family began to respond in subtle but meaningful ways. Aunt Ruth called on Sundays, checking in, not for updates on my parents, but to talk about me, about the truth, and about the lessons learned. Cousins who had once assumed Marcus was the good son started asking questions quietly, seeking to understand what had really happened. Uncle Bob reached out with long emails, reflecting on patterns they had unconsciously reinforced and admitting they hadn't recognized my contributions. The recognition of my worth was beginning to ripple outward, slow and deliberate. At home with Daniel, our apartment became a sanctuary. The quiet freedom of controlling our lives, resources, and energy allowed me to see just how much of myself had been consumed by obligations that were never acknowledged. Every dollar that had once gone to my parents now built our shared future vacations, investments, and dreams that belonged to us. Every decision reinforced the boundaries I had fought to establish, and every boundary strengthened my sense of self-worth. I began noticing subtle shifts in myself, too. The tension in my shoulders, the half-held breath, the constant anticipation of judgment, all of it was easing. I could focus on growth, connection, and experiences that mattered to me. 15 years of erased work had shaped me, but it no longer defined my life. I had reclaimed it fully. One quiet evening, I reflected on what had happened. Marcus had begun to understand his own failings. My parents were slowly processing their role, and the rest of the family was waking to the truth. And yet, for all their realizations, the most important change had already occurred. I was no longer invisible, no longer obligated to sustain lies, and no longer defined by the absence of acknowledgement. I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my agency. The family, in whatever form it now existed, would have to reckon with that reality, and for the first time, I could simply breathe, fully present in a life that was truly mine. A few weeks later, I found myself back on the phone with Aunt Patricia. Our conversations had become a lifeline, bridging the gap between the family I was born into and the family I was choosing to build. Her voice carried warmth, understanding, and a quiet strength that mirrored what I had been seeking all these years. I shared small victories with her, weekends with Daniel free from guilt, mornings spent planning our future, and moments of reflection that no longer carried the weight of expectation. She listened, offering perspective and encouragement without judgment. In her family, I saw a model of what relationships could be: mutual respect, honesty, and love without strings attached. For the first time, I realized that family wasn't defined by blood alone. It was defined by the people who saw you, acknowledged your worth, and protected your dignity. Sitting in my apartment, sipping coffee with Daniel, I felt it fully. The past 15 years had shaped me, but they did not dictate my present. I was free to build a life rooted in respect, honesty, and connection. The family I had always wanted wasn't behind me, it was beside me now. And in that quiet certainty, I felt a peace I hadn't known since childhood. For the first time, I belonged. Sitting on the porch of our new apartment, the winter sun low in the sky, I finally allowed myself to breathe. 15 years of invisible sacrifice, erased contributions, and miscredited efforts had ended. Marcus, my parents, even the extended family, they were left to reckon with the truth. I, however, was free. Daniel joined me with a cup of tea, his presence calm and grounding. We watched the sun dip behind the city skyline, quiet companions in a life built on clarity and respect. The weight of obligation, of unacknowledged effort, had lifted. Boundaries had been drawn, respected, and maintained. For the first time, I could fully focus on growth, on chosen family, on the relationships that honored my worth. I reflected on what 15 years had taught me. Love is not a ledger. Sacrifice should not come at the cost of self. And sometimes, the most courageous act is to step back, reclaim your life, and protect your dignity. If this story resonates with you and you've ever felt invisible or unrecognized, take a moment now. Subscribe and stand for dignity, because your worth deserves to be seen, your voice deserves to be heard, and your life deserves boundaries that protect it.